Ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, good afternoon. I am Stephen Mureithi, a civil and structural engineer from Kenya. First, an apology for not being physically available at the conference. Pilots from Kenya put down their tools, which means that access outside the country has become a little difficult, and thus I was not able to make it. However, I hope that this video will provide a suitable alternative to my presence, and that all the ideas presented here are clear, concise, and understandable. However, if that is not the case, my details are on the presentation, and you can contact me anytime for further inquiry. Now let's get to the project. Okay, so my study is on runoff estimation using satellite images in sparsely gauged basin, a case of Nzoia River Basin in Kenya. So those are my details there, my email and my phone number for those interested. So let's get into the presentation. So the introduction, we know that all resilience infrastructure must express some form of climate resilience. One of the most important forms of climate resilience considered when designing for any major projects is its resilience to flooding. In fact, the location of a structure may be entirely based on whether or not the structure is located in a flood basin. For those who are familiar with this, we know that the 100-year flood is normally considered for this. So to be able to effectively design resilient infrastructure, it is therefore important to have accurate runoff data in order to mitigate against the adverse effects of flooding. Floods occur when runoff in a catchment area is excessive, causing inundation of land above the expected limits of a water channel. Therefore, the identification of watersheds and the study of their runoff characteristics is probably the most important step in improving the resilience of structures to flooding. Runoff data is also crucially important for the design of flood mitigation infrastructure, such as dams and levees, and in the design of structures such as bridges, water intake plants, among many others. So we have the problem statement. For some remote areas in developing countries like Kenya, we know that the meteorological data available is usually scarce in our temporal scales, exhibiting multiple gaps due to problems associated with inadequate staffing of observed water stations. What this means in simple terms is that you'll find a lot of data missing in terms of the time. For instance, you find data for 1 month is missing, or even for a whole year in adverse cases. On the other hand, we can solve this problem by using satellite data. However, satellite data is not satisfactory in a temporal scale, and that is not satisfactory for further use. It requires to be calibrated with observed station data so that it can be used for engineering and hydrologic purposes. So what this means, we have some satellites at scales of 100 times 100 kilometers, 200 times 200, and when that is when you require the data to be accurate, you'll find that there are issues with that. There are also issues with attenuations and backscatters of data, among many other things that make satellite data to be not so attractive in terms of spatial scales, despite the fact that it's temporally adequate on the fact that it has data for almost every day. Some satellites even have data for twice or thrice a day. So using any of this data without any of this data separately poses the risk of poor runoff estimation, which may lead to poor design of hydrological structures and compromising the efficacy of early warning systems and disaster management in the onset of floods, droughts, and other natural disasters. So what we mean here is that if you want to use satellite data in these remote areas, it is advisable for you to calibrate it, because using any of this data in isolation will not help so much, particularly if you are interested in accuracy of data. So we'll go to a brief description of what the study entails. So the study was carried out for Nzoia Basin, which exhibits temporal and spatial scarcity of rainfall and temperature data available, both for satellite and observed data. Now, that scarcity was described previously. It's common in many places, Nzoia River Basin being one of them. So this is despite regular loss of lives and property due to flooding, particularly in the lowland regions of the watershed. Despite the fact that it is of paramount importance that this data be available, it's not there. So yeah, so it's pertinent that someone comes up with a way to provide a suitable way to give this data and make it available to the public. So in the basin, data from rain gauge networks is insufficient at a temporal scale and will pose challenges when used in runoff estimation. Specifically, of the 113 stations with observed rainfall data, only 19 stations had satisfied 80% completeness of data when you consider the study area, that is 1982 to 2009. This means that less than 0.2% of weather stations in the watershed provide enough data to meet the lowest limit required for use of a data set in further analysis. On the other hand, we have GEOS 5 satellite by NASA, specifically obtained from the power data outsource. However, now we can see that it is poor on spatial scales. We can see it ranges from 100 kilometers times 100 to 50 by 50 kilometers and to 50 by 375 kilometers. And there are also uncertainties involved with remote sensing, indirect nature of radar measurements, and attenuations and backscatters due to satellites. So to solve the problem of data scarcity in Nzoia Basin pertaining the same, the study obtained meteorological data from PowerNASA's GEOS 5 satellites and then calibrated this data with observed data, and then this calibrated data was input into a runoff model for runoff estimation. So study area, that's Nzoia River Basin. I think this is straightforward. The river is about 330 kilometers up to its outfall, and its area is around 1,777 times 10 to 6 meter cubed per year, and the physical location in terms of coordinates is shown. So we have the runoff model, which we chose for this case NumMike 11, which is one-dimensional runoff model, and that's what we saw was suitable since it was very straightforward to use. And so the tolerance decided when using the model was 5% in terms of water balance, which means that we were expected that the results we obtained to have a water balance between 0.95 and 1.05, and additionally we required an R squared of at least above 0.7. As we know, an R squared of 1 represents direct correlation, while that of 0 represent opposite in terms of correlation between the two data sets. So the study period, limited by data availability, again brings the issue of data scarcity, was 1982 to 2009, of which calibration period was 1982 to 1990 and calibration from 1984 to 1986 and validation from 1987 to 1989. And the iterative adjustments taken in the runoff parameters was 3% adjustment until a suitable R-squared coefficient and water balance was struck. So that was the result from model calibration. We were able to obtain an R-squared of 0.9, which is pretty good. As you can see, the data seems to be the observed discharge seems to be correlating with the simulated discharge, which is good. However, you can see the gaps in terms of data that I have just mentioned and I have kept mentioning. Observe, for instance, in 1985, 1984, there you can see a gap, another gap in 1985 to etc. And so validation of the results, as you can see, an R-squared was 0.8, which was okay, and the graph shows that this correlation is actually satisfactory when you look at it at a glance. So we ask ourselves, why was not correlation not 1 to 1? These are due to a few errors, like shifting the days, the record errors, the missing values, and change in land use land cover characteristics. So we have this special case for 2008 to 2009, which was so lacking in terms of data that it seems that calibration has failed, but it has not failed. Another case of data scarcity coming into play. So you have conclusions. Statistical analysis shows that GEOS5 data generally tends to overestimate weather parameters at high values and underestimate at low values. Calibrating this data improves it for further analysis, and the longer the time period taken, the better the estimation obtained. The runoff model proved successful with R-squared of about 0.9 for calibration and 0.8 for validation period, above the 0.7 threshold that was established. So calibrated GEOS5 data performed well from Nzoia Basin when compared with satellite data, which now we will call that satellite data was representing an R-squared of 0.6, and improving that to 0.9 is pretty satisfactory. So in conclusion, therefore, the study was able to improve GEOS5 data for runoff estimation. Finally, thank you for listening to my presentation. For any queries or questions, you have my details. I hope you can reach out to me anytime. Thank you.